Cheaters are willing to destroy their families, their own lives, and the lives of loved ones. Do they deserve forgiveness? Gentlemen, let's hear the cheater's confession. My husband and I tied the knot 12 years ago. For almost 16 years, we've both been in our 30s. We have two wonderful children, a 10-year-old son and a 9-year-old daughter. What strikes me about my husband is his ability not only to keep the family together while we both work, but also how he manifests himself as a father. Even my parents value him more than me and my brother. Often, my friends remind me how lucky I am to have devoted myself to a long-term relationship with such an exceptional person. It was during the period when I started working evening shifts to adjust to my husband's schedule that I ran into another man at my workplace. It is curious that this happened during a normal fire alarm. Coincidentally, our gathering places were nearby, and he decided to come up to me and get acquainted. Although he also works in the same building, his office is on a different floor. Unlike my husband, this man is tall and spends a lot of time in the gym. In addition, he exudes an aura of self-confidence, and his appearance is so captivating that it can be compared with that of a professional model. Unfortunately, despite the circumstances I have already mentioned, I admit my grave mistake. Another man was paying me excessive attention. His constant text messages flooded my phone, often containing pictures of his flawlessly embossed abs, and even turned into a frank plane. He exerted subtle pressure on me to reciprocate. Mentally, I understood the inappropriateness of our exchanges, but the feeling of trembling in my stomach engulfed me completely. It was like I was transported back to my school years, enjoying the joy that accompanies teasing and flirting. Paradoxically, despite the fact that I perfectly understood what this was fraught with, and that it could destroy my marriage if my husband found out the truth, this danger gave the situation additional sharpness and attractiveness. I reached a depressing moment when I convinced myself that my dependence on my husband as the main person taking care of the house no longer corresponded to my desires. The seeds of doubt have taken root, convincing me that my husband does not provide me with the attention I crave. It pains me to admit it, but I got to the point where I was constantly fixated on my phone, looking forward to his next message. After a deeper bond had been established between us for 2 months, he invited me to lunch on Friday. We went to the meeting using his car and choosing a convenient option. As a result, we decided to enjoy lunch in his car, valuing the time spent together. Under the influence of circumstances, one thing replaced another, and we were involved in passionate kisses, which inevitably escalated into a moment of intimacy in the cabin of his car. After our meeting in the back seat, I was overcome by a feeling of some cheap meanness. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing the disgusting nature of my actions. The situation was aggravated by the fact that our meeting took place without any protection. The fog of the affair dissipated, and I realized with alarm that I had betrayed my husband. It was the most painful experience I had ever experienced. At first, the alluring picture of the forbidden seemed tempting, but as soon as we crossed the threshold, a wave of anxiety swept over me. Guilt and shame overwhelmed my consciousness. It became clear that what I was striving for did not correspond to my true desires, and I made a huge mistake in my decisions. When I got home, I tried to find solace in the shower, but no amount of water could rid me of the deep shame that gripped me. When I entered the bedroom, my husband was peacefully dozing, unaware of the shock that had gripped me. I stood in silent reflection, and tears flowed down my cheeks as I realized the gravity of my act. Deep remorse seized me, and I realized the gravity of my act. The next morning, I woke up to the delightful sound of my husband delighting our children. They cuddled up to each other and watched TV while my husband arranged an interactive spectacle, participating in a sword duel with an imaginary opponent. Laughter and giggles echoed through the room, illuminating their joyful faces. Captured by this delightful sight, I froze in the doorway, silently immersed in the warmth of their communication. I tried to take meaningful steps to correct the situation, although I wasn't going to admit my misdeeds to my husband. I was determined to become the best version of myself for him. We began to engage in intimate relationships every day, using every opportunity for communication. If circumstances did not allow, I tried to please him by making deliberate gestures before or after each meeting. In addition, I took responsibility for the kitchen, began to cook homemade food more often, and resumed our cherished tradition of dating. Thanks to the unwavering support of my parents, I began to change my approach to our relationship, hoping to mend the broken trust. My husband made the painful decision to leave. He felt that the damage to our relationship was irreparable and that staying together would only bring more pain. He explained that he needed to prioritize his own well-being and that of our children. With a heavy heart, he packed his bags and left the house, leaving me alone to face the consequences of my actions. In the days that followed, I was overwhelmed with guilt and regret. I tried to reach out to him, but he refused to answer my calls or respond to my messages. Desperately seeking redemption, I took it upon myself to become the best version of myself, not just for him, but for our children. I devoted myself to being a better mother, taking on more responsibilities at home, and doing everything I could to show him that I had changed. My husband eventually returned home, but it was clear that things would never be the same. He focused on our children and avoided me as much as possible. We had long, painful conversations about our relationship, during which he expressed his anger, hurt, and disappointment. He made it clear that he could not trust me anymore and that our marriage was over. Despite the heartbreak, I accepted his decision and agreed to a divorce. We decided to co-parent our children, putting their well-being first. It was a difficult transition, but I was determined to prove to him and to myself that I could be a better person. As time went on, I slowly started to rebuild my life. I sought therapy to understand why I had made such a terrible mistake and how I could avoid repeating it in the future. I focused on my career and became more involved in my children's lives. My parents and friends supported me through this challenging time, and I learned valuable lessons about love, trust, and forgiveness. Looking back, I realized that my affair had been a wake-up call. It forced me to confront my flaws and work on becoming a better person. Although I lost my marriage, I gained a deeper understanding of myself and what truly matters in life. I vowed never to make the same mistake again and to cherish the people who love and support me and focus on himself. Seeing him so put together, I felt a pang of guilt and sadness. We exchanged polite greetings and sat down at our table, the atmosphere thick with unspoken words. As we began our conversation, he opened up about his feelings and the impact my actions had on him. "I've been deeply hurt, Emily," he started, his voice calm but laced with pain. "Your betrayal shook the very foundation of our marriage. It's been a struggle to come to terms with it." I nodded, fighting back tears. "I understand, James. I know I've hurt you deeply, and I regret my actions every single day. I want to make things right, to rebuild what we've lost." James sighed, looking down at his hands. "It's not that simple. Trust, once broken, is hard to mend, but I'm willing to try for the sake of our children and the life we've built together." I felt a glimmer of hope at his words. "Thank you, James. I promise to do everything in my power to earn back your trust. I'll take on more responsibilities at home, spend less time with friends, and support you in any way I can, even if you want to return to school." He looked at me, his expression softening slightly. "I appreciate that, Emily, but it's not just about what you can do for me. It's about us working together to heal and move forward." I nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. "I know, and I'm committed to making it work. I'll even understand if you feel the need to explore other relationships. I just want you to be happy." James shook his head. "That's not the solution, Emily. We need to focus on rebuilding our connection, not complicating it further." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "You're right, James. I'm just so desperate to make things right that I was willing to do anything." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Let's take it one step at a time. We'll have good days and bad days, but if we're both committed, we can find a way through this." We sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of our conversations sink in. The waiter arrived with our food, and we ate quietly, each lost in our thoughts. Despite the uncertainty, there was a sense of resolution in the air. As the evening drew to a close, James looked at me with a mix of determination and hope. "Emily, I don't know what the future holds, but I'm willing to give us a chance. Let's see where this journey takes us." I smiled through my tears, grateful for this second chance. Thank you, James. I won't let you down. We left the restaurant together, the familiar streets holding a new significance for us. It wouldn't be easy, but we were both willing to fight for our marriage. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of hope and determination. We would rebuild, step by step, and maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. I would do everything in my power to protect our family. As we left the dimly lit restaurant, there was a tension in the air like a hidden storm. The atmosphere crackled with unspoken words, and I prepared myself for what lay ahead. When my instinct of wanting to hug him flared up, he abruptly stopped me. We sat at a secluded corner table away from other customers, creating an atmosphere of awkward privacy. There was an awkward silence in the air, unwilling to part, as we both avoided eye contact. Butterflies fluttered in my stomach, a familiar sensation accompanying moments of approaching denouement. Finally, breaking the suffocating silence, he let out a deep sigh. His voice trembled, and he began, "Listen, I need to discuss something with you." A surge of adrenaline coursed through my veins as our eyes met, revealing in his gaze a stormy mixture of suffering, rage, and betrayal. I braced myself for the inevitable, even though a tiny glimmer of hope whispered that maybe we could still salvage the pieces of our broken bond. His voice trembled with surging emotions as he continued to speak, unable to ignore the harsh reality of what had happened between us and my colleague. The revelation broke him, split us irreparably, and although he tried to comprehend and understand all this, he admitted that he could not do it. Sleepless nights tormented him, painfully going over every detail in his mind, and led to a painful realization he could no longer carry this load. His words hung in the air like a dense, suffocating fog, leaving a heavy imprint on the once hopeful atmosphere. When tears welled up in my eyes, I instinctively reached for his hand, looking for comfort and connection, but he abruptly recoiled, ceasing all physical contact. His voice trembled with fragile vulnerability as he uttered his next words, and it was clear how hard this decision was for him. "I have made a decision," he continued in a broken voice. "We need to get a divorce." At that moment, my world shattered into many pieces. The suffering reflected in his eyes became a mirror image of the piercing pain that tormented my heart, but I refused to accept this fate without a struggle. "No," I whispered, tears streaming down my cheeks, desperately clinging to a glimmer of hope. "We can't give up. Let's deal with this for the sake of our children. Please give us a try." My every being prayed for the revival of our love, not allowing it to fade so easily, but he shook his head. His determination was unyielding and cast a dark shadow over all the remnants of optimism. Faced with his firm determination, I found myself in a suffocating silence. My husband's determination to end our marriage remained unyielding, and I felt an indescribable sense of emptiness. Uncontrollable sobs escaped from my trembling lips. It seemed that the foundation of my world was collapsing before my eyes, making me absolutely powerless. Guilt, regret, and heartache intertwined in me, causing a storm of emotions, and yet, in the depths of despair, a spark of defiance lit up. I gathered the strength to wipe away the tears, and with full determination, I looked into his eyes, intending to convey my truth. Having answered decisively, I gained strength and told my truth. "If you really want it, if you are determined to see it through, then so be it. But know this, I will not make it easier for you. I will fight to the last to protect our family, and I will not sign the divorce papers without a fight." He nodded, his face still showing the pain that was similar to my own. "I didn't expect anything less from you," he whispered softly, as we sat frozen in a precarious balance between the past and the future. I was overcome by deep sadness. It was painful for me to watch our once beautiful love story unfold, turning into a tragedy. The road loomed ahead, ominous from the weight of the upcoming mental pain and uncertainty. Amid the floods of tears and complete self-doubt, I firmly knew one thing. I would do everything in my power to protect our family. I will not give up without a fight for the sake of the love we once shared and the life we painstakingly built together. But the days that followed turned into a tedious mess, an incessant flurry of paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and disapproving views of loved ones. The exposure of my indiscretion seemed to spread like wildfire, spurred on by my husband's thirst to justify himself. He decided to reveal our shattered trust to everyone we knew, leaving me with an unbearable sense of shame. The burden of constant condemnation and whispers behind my back began to undermine my spirit, exhausting me every day. The mounting pressure pushed me to the edge, threatening to break my spirit. Even my family, who had always been my reliable support, now expressed their deep disappointment and heartache about my actions. They sided with my husband, persuading me to agree to the divorce he wanted. The weight of their expectations, combined with the incessant pressure from all sides, became unbearable. I felt trapped, forced to make decisions that I wasn't emotionally ready for. During the tumultuous divorce process, I gathered all my strength to fiercely fight for primary custody of our children. Despite my blunders, I believed that I could become a loving and devoted mother for them. With firm determination, I sought to shelter them from the storm of a broken marriage and give them stability and love, even amid chaos and pain. During the divorce process, I argued to the court, drawing attention to my husband's busy work schedule and arguing that this hindered his ability to provide the necessary stability and care for our children. In addition, I stressed the need to pay child support given his significantly higher income, as well as alimony to maintain the lifestyle to which I am accustomed. But the court's decision showed the harsh reality. They recognized that my husband spent more time with the children because of my busy work and therefore granted us joint custody. It was a bittersweet victory. But on the other hand, I continued to be an integral part of my children's lives, providing them with the love, support, and care they needed. The privilege of participating in their upbringing gave me hope against the background of the difficulties associated with overcoming the consequences of our broken marriage. At the same time, realizing that joint guardianship was granted, I did not have the opportunity to individually influence my children, which I counted on. This additional disappointment weighed on me. In addition, the court rejected my request for alimony, considering it unnecessary due to the divided custody responsibilities. No less disappointing was the refusal to satisfy my application for alimony recovery. It seemed that the universe conspired against me, leaving me alone to deal with the consequences of my actions. When the divorce process came to an end, I found myself in the abyss of darkness and emptiness. My husband moved out, and our communication was now limited exclusively to issues related to children. The emptiness that formed after the rupture of our once close connection left an imprint of deep loneliness on me, which further increased the severity of my own guilt. No matter how hard I tried, my husband stubbornly refused to communicate with me on any other topics. The painful reality has come that the relationships we once cherished are now irretrievably destroyed. Despair made me reach out to my husband and ask for forgiveness for the pain caused, expressing my deep regret, but my words were met with icy silence, indicating his emotional detachment. It became painfully clear that he had moved away from our union, breaking the emotional ties that once bound us. The weight of isolation and loneliness became exorbitant, squeezing my spirit. At that moment, I realized that I had lost not only my husband but also my life and family, which I treasured so much. After the divorce, I was shattered, the remnants of what was once whole hurt in me. I realized that I had lost the support and security that I once took for granted. The familiar pillars on which my life was held now lay in ruins, leaving behind a void full of uncertainty and pain. And yet, amid the darkness, a glimmer of hope was preserved. In this desert, I clung to the fragile hope that time could serve as a catalyst for healing and growth. I wanted to rebuild my ruined life, not only for my own sake, but also to regain the trust and love of those whom I had hurt the most, my children. With all determination, I vowed to seek redemption, to heal the wounds inflicted by my own actions, and to create a future in which love and trust would be restored. I am now in complete despair, as I recently found out that I am HIV positive. This scumbag not only destroyed my strong and loving family, but also infected me. I do not know how to live on. Once I made a mistake, I completely destroyed my life and caused emotional pain to my children. It seems to me that I am at a dead end. All my family and friends hate me for such a terrible act, And if they find out that I am also HIV positive, they will completely bury me in their memory. Recently, I called my ex-husband and told him about my illness. I asked him for forgiveness and advised him to take an HIV test. He was furious. He took out all his anger on me. I was terribly ashamed. To my horror, a week later, I found out that my husband is also HIV positive and wants to destroy me. I don't even know how to handle everything. In all 25 years of our marriage, my wife has never shown any suspicious actions. We have always been a stable and strong couple. I was shocked when one day I received a message from a woman who claimed that her future husband confessed to her of cheating with an older work colleague. She gave me the name of the woman in question and said she thought I deserved to know the truth. At first, I was wary of this fact and could not bring myself to believe her. But when she continued to tell the details of the situation, my doubts began to dissipate. It didn't matter if she wanted revenge on my wife or sincerely believed that I deserved to know the truth. What mattered was the truth that was gradually being revealed to me. When I put it all together, it became clear that the woman's statements were indeed true. Interested persons provided her with detailed information, the name of the hotel, and even the address of my house where they met. It was hard to accept that my wife had entered into an affair with a man much younger than herself, only 21 years old. I couldn't help thinking that she had deliberately planned this during my planned business trip, which I had arranged for several months. This coincidence seemed too suspicious, and it was hard for me to believe that her betrayal was not intentional. My relationship with my wife became impossible, and I came to the conclusion that divorce was inevitable. I am currently preparing the necessary financial documents and solving other issues, discussing my situation with a close friend who went through a similar experience. She gave valuable advice to avoid conflicts with my wife, as this can lead to her explosive reaction when she is cornered. Although I do not believe that my wife will show such behavior, it is still uncertain. It is unpleasant for me to watch her daily actions when she pretends that nothing has happened. She continues to plan our future holidays and discuss trips with our daughters, and I feel deprived of any emotional connection. Our house now resembles a shared space, and I myself no longer have any meaningful feelings for her. I exist like a ghost, doing the usual things, waking up early, going to the gym, going to work, and so on. I come home around 7 in the evening and do my business. I feel that something is wrong with my wife, but I treat her concern indifferently. The most painful moment in this ordeal was when my daughters knew about the betrayal. One of my daughters accidentally saw them kissing in our living room. It seems that my wife managed to calm her down and give an explanation. Unfortunately, my daughter chose not to tell me about this incident, leaving me in the dark about what conversation my wife had with her in order to keep everything a secret. Given the close bond between my daughters, I'm sure she confided in her siblings. After learning about this unpleasant event, I considered it my duty to give them a loving and benevolent upbringing. I have devoted countless hours to building my business to provide them with all the necessary capabilities and resources. When making decisions concerning my work, their well-being has always come first. My goal was to give them the opportunity to get a college education without debt and to ensure their success in their future careers. I tried to be present at all important events and be there for them when they needed me. Like any father, we faced certain difficulties, but nothing serious. They are my precious daughters, and I have always considered it my duty to be a support and guide for them. The fact that my daughters kept such an important secret from me causes me deep pain. I think they decided to hide the truth out of fear that it would destroy our family, and I can understand their motives for such a decision. But at the same time, a feeling of anger grows in me, which seems to consume me whenever I see them asking for advice or asking for help with things like a deposit for an apartment in our WhatsApp group. I have a desire to yell at them and fight back, but deep down, I know that it won't solve anything. This will only give me fleeting satisfaction, after which the pain will make itself felt again. Another part of me longs to escape from all this, close my bank accounts, pack my bags, and break off relations with everyone connected with it. This internal struggle weighs on me. I am torn between the desire to preserve what is left of our family and an irresistible desire to leave it all behind. I began to like the idea of leaving silently without saying a word, although a close friend warned against it because of the legal consequences. But I am becoming more and more convinced that this option attracts me. I have no desire to engage in conversation with her about this, or try to understand their point of view. All I want is to escape and disappear to a place like Thailand. I imagine lying on a quiet beach for months so that time heals my wounds. Maybe someday I'll be ready to listen, but I can't guarantee that. I don't want to hear apologies or regrets for not informing me. They had 3 long years to confess, but they chose to look me in the eye and remain silent. I am deeply disappointed that the 4 of them continue to behave as if nothing had happened and behave as usual. It feels like they are skillful manipulators, and my anger only intensifies. If you were in my place, what would you do? Reconciliation with my wife is out of the question. I am repelled by her actions, and her facade of a loving spouse only kindles a fire in me. Fortunately, my friend supports me by sharing her own experience, which allows me to look at the situation from the outside. But I still ask for advice about my daughters. One part of me wants to talk to them, and the other believes that they do not deserve any explanation and recognition. The reality is that it's too late for reconciliation now, and I feel incredibly lost. My lawyer informed me that since our children have already grown up, there will be no problems with alimony. Perhaps my wife will ask for alimony for herself, but given that she works and is financially stable, the judge will most likely reject this request. We have a shared account that we use for joint expenses, but otherwise, we each have our own separate bank accounts. This advice was passed on to me from my parents, who believe that if both partners work, it is best to maintain individual financial independence. I am grateful to my parents for the advice to keep separate bank accounts, which turned out to be useful in our situation. I can't help but thank them for these recommendations. According to my lawyer, there is a possibility that my wife may claim a part of my business in the event of its sale, referring to its success. But since she also works, we can present counter-arguments on this score. To be honest, at the moment, I don't care much about the financial aspects. As for the conversation with my daughters, I understand and agree with the advice that my parents gave me. The reason for my indecision so far is the constant anger that continues to engulf me. I'm afraid that if one of them says something that doesn't suit me, I might snap. It's hard for me to get rid of the idea that my wife manipulated them to keep her infidelity a secret. I understand that by allowing myself to break down in anger, I will only aggravate the situation. Obviously, my anger is somewhat inappropriate since it has turned from hatred of my wife into indifference. I understand that I will get a divorce, and eventually she will leave my life, but when it comes to my children, it's a completely different story. I can't bring myself to hate them. I still have deep feelings for them. Unfortunately, at the moment, anger prevails over these emotions. As for telling the other 2 daughters about the betrayal, it seems likely to me that the younger one would have trusted her brothers and sisters. Their close bond and history of supporting each other make me believe that my youngest shared the truth. But as someone rightly pointed out, I can't be completely sure about this assumption. I want to make it clear that I don't want to blame my daughters for their actions or decisions. I can understand their point of view if they decided to keep the affair a secret to protect our family. But it's hard for me to accept the lies and betrayal that have taken place. It seems that they sided with the mother in her infidelity. Now, I need to be alone to make sense of everything that happened. Unfortunately, it has not been easy to find time for loneliness lately. If you take into account the relationship with my wife, taking care of 3 daughters, and running a business, then the only semblance of personal time for me is the moments that I allow myself in the gym. But I don't feel like it's enough to really mitigate the anger I'm feeling. Also, given my current situation, it would be awkward to inform them that I need to leave for a long time, for example, for a month. I understand how important it is to prioritize health checks, including paternity tests and examinations for sexually transmitted diseases. Of course, do not forget about the need for the necessary tests. To do this, I have already made an appointment at one of the clinics. When it comes to paternity tests, I begin to doubt their significance. Even in the worst case, if they are not my biological relatives, does it really matter? I have spent 20 years raising them, and they are my daughters in every sense. Blood kinship is not the determining factor of our connection. If they are not biologically mine, then it is the mother's responsibility, not theirs. I can't hold them responsible for something that doesn't depend on them. It is also possible that the woman who informed me about the betrayal lied. Initially, this was my first thought, and I continued to consider it. We have always been perceived as a strong couple, and at first, my reaction to the words of a woman who approached me about my wife's alleged infidelity was skepticism and disbelief. But when she began to tell me more and more details and evidence, doubts began to creep into my soul. Although I am not particularly concerned about the motives that prompted her to disclose this information, more and more new evidence did not allow her to ignore it. Unable to live in denial, I started my own investigation. When you know what you're looking for, it becomes easier to find clues and build the truth, no matter how painful it may be. I firmly believe that you need to face the facts, and the facts pointed to an unpleasant reality. My wife was really unfaithful. It seems that the man with whom my wife had an affair felt it necessary to confess his actions. Although I do not know either his motives or what was on his mind, this revelation made me break off relations with all the participants and start the process of moving forward. But I would like to clarify that my previous statements about leaving did not mean a final decision. When I talked about leaving, I meant that I needed some time to heal and sort things out on my own. After I am cured, I really intend to talk openly and honestly with my children. But I understand perfectly well that everything will never be the same again. Despite my anger, I feel a deep sense of love and responsibility towards my family, and I can't just walk away from her without trying to find a solution. The idea that I can leave my wife alone simply destroys me because it will undoubtedly have a strong influence on her. Moreover, my other two daughters may take offense at her for the consequences of such a decision. This is my worst nightmare, and it's probably stupid of me to consider it in the first place. It is my duty as a father to protect them, and I will do my best to fulfill this role. I will consult with my lawyer to speed up the paperwork and ensure that they are delivered to my wife in a timely manner. I hope that by next week, all the necessary documents will be prepared and I will be able to start a conversation with my daughters. It is not yet known how this conversation will develop. Perhaps my own experience will be useful for others, although I sincerely hope that no one will find themselves in a similar situation and will not seek advice. As an addition, I decided to invite my youngest daughter to lunch last week. During lunch, I cautiously asked her if there was anything she wanted to share with me. It seems that my facial expression or tone conveyed my intention as she immediately understood what topic I was hinting at. Overwhelmed with emotion, she broke down and told me the whole story. It turns out that a few years ago, she witnessed her mother kissing another man in our house. Surprisingly, my wife asked the man to leave and then sat down with our daughter to discuss the situation. My wife admitted that it was a momentary blunder, but expressed gratitude that our daughter intervened and put an end to the situation. She swore it was a one-time mistake and begged her daughter not to tell me anything, fearing that I would just leave her and our family. The daughter said that she agreed to keep everything a secret because she believed her mother's explanations. Later, she told her sister about the incident. As you can imagine, both my daughters were shocked by this revelation. In particular, the elder was skeptical about the claim that this was an isolated case. She found it too convenient that my youngest accidentally walked into the living room and witnessed how they kissed for the first time. I am very proud of my eldest daughter for taking on the burden of confronting her mother in treason. According to the younger daughter, it seems that the older one talked to her mother about her infidelity and made it clear that if she did not confess to me, then they would take matters into their own hands. But over the past few years, the mother has constantly found reasons to delay revealing the truth, whether it's a situation at work, a sick relative, or other circumstances. There was always an excuse because she thought it would be too hard to add this revelation to what I had already experienced. By the end of our lunch, I informed my youngest daughter that I would contact her mother to discuss everything and find a way out. It was a difficult moment, but I knew that it was necessary in order to move forward and find a solution. She insisted on participating in the conversation, and I respected her wish. I immediately sent a message to the other two daughters saying that we needed to talk urgently. I felt that they might already guess what it was about. My wife cheated on me with my father, but karma di won. We quickly agreed to talk over the phone, and it was clear that they already knew what their sister had told me. During our conversation, both of my daughters started crying, apologizing for not telling the truth sooner. I reassured them that I didn't hold a grudge and expressed my sorrow that they had carried this burden for so long. I wanted them to understand that my love for them would never fade. Regarding their mother, I told them I had decided to leave because I couldn't see a future with her anymore. It was a difficult and emotional moment for all of us, but I felt it was necessary to move forward and find my own path. After our talk, I realized it would be incredibly hard to stay with someone who had betrayed me. However, I promised myself I would discuss everything with my wife before making any final decisions. I asked my daughters not to tell their mother about our conversation, as I planned to talk to her later that evening. When the workday ended, I went home and found my wife there, chatting about her day as usual. Taking a deep breath, I mentioned that I had an interesting conversation with our daughter. Her immediate reaction showed she knew exactly what I was referring to. Overcome with emotion, she began to sob, insisting it was just a kiss and that she feared losing me over something so minor, knowing how much I value trust. Despite her tears, I felt no emotional response. I calmly informed her that the divorce papers would be delivered the next day, marking our decision to part ways. I then packed my things and left for a hotel in the city center, unable to stay in our house any longer. Realizing my youngest daughter wanted to avoid being home and facing her mother, I called to tell her I wouldn't be home that night. She asked to stay with me, and I agreed without hesitation. I notified my other two daughters of this plan, and they expressed a desire to talk without any outsiders. I agreed and shared the next steps based on my lawyer's advice, emphasizing my unconditional love for them. Despite everything, I couldn't help but express my resentment that they had kept this secret. I reminded them of our strong bond and our ability to discuss anything. This brought them to tears and apologies again. I reassured them that my love for them remained unwavering, but it would take time for me to return to normal. I mentioned the possibility of taking a long trip to find clarity, and to my surprise, my eldest daughter encouraged me to do so if I felt the need. The next morning, while having breakfast with my daughter, my wife called. At first, I hesitated to answer, but my daughter insisted. I reluctantly agreed and put her on speaker. It was clear she had been drinking all night. She cried, professing her love and saying we were meant to be together. During our conversation, I emphasized that our children were adults now and capable of building their own lives. Unexpectedly, she turned vicious, threatening to take everything from me, ruin my company, and falsely accuse me of physical assault. Shocked, I ended the call, telling her my lawyer would contact her. 5 minutes later, my daughter received a message from her mother, wanting to talk. Sensing her fear, I advised her not to respond, recognizing her mother's intoxicated state wouldn't lead to a productive conversation. I told my daughter I would stay at the hotel until things settled, inviting her to join me if she wished. We had another group call with my other daughters, explaining what had happened. As expected, they were overwhelmed. I immediately met with my lawyer, who reassured me that I had nothing to worry about legally. Although my wife might be entitled to half of our shared property, my personal savings and business assets should remain untouched. My daughter was afraid to return home, fearing she would be blamed. I promised to find a place in the city center for us, offering comfort and stability. Her mother's unstable behavior during the call had deeply disturbed her. I assured her I could arrange for counseling if she needed it. After receiving the divorce papers, my wife reportedly reacted violently, involving our families in the ordeal. Her family tried to contact us, but I knew that focusing on my daughter's well-being was my priority. But my eldest daughter resolutely stopped all attempts to communicate. As for me, my brother understands me and supports me. He knows that without good reason, I wouldn't have taken such a serious step. Thus, we know that the divorce process has officially begun. At this point, my daughter will stay with me until she feels comfortable enough to return home, whenever that may be. Despite the messages from her mother, my lawyer strongly advises against meeting with her. He asserts that nothing can be gained and everything can be lost in such a situation. So, I will heed his advice. Regarding my own plans, I've decided not to go to Thailand until I'm sure my youngest daughter is all right. If I do decide to go, it will likely be next year after she graduates from high school. It's unclear how our daily lives will evolve, but we will face it together. These are the latest updates. I want to thank everyone who commented on my previous posts. Your support means a lot. Despite the pain caused by infidelity, I believe that going through this process has made me better and stronger. It was an incredibly tough journey, but I found inner resilience and growth amidst the pain. Story 3. As I sit here trying to convey the sufferings and shocks that have overwhelmed our lives, a feeling of remorse and sadness doesn't leave me. It all started when, after the DNA test of our eldest son, my husband confronted me. I didn't know this confrontation would unveil hidden truths and deceptions I had concealed for a long time. Now I must admit the obvious. I am to blame for the current situation, and I sincerely acknowledge that I provoked this misfortune. I am in a difficult position due to the situation that has arisen. Turning to you, I sincerely ask for advice and support on how to restore the shattered foundation of trust with the spouse who betrayed me. This unfortunate incident happened 6 years ago, in 2016, when I was young and made a serious mistake. John and I had been in a relationship for 2 years. We were connected by a story deeply rooted in our shared upbringing in the same hometown. Our connection blossomed from childhood friendship into a school romance. Despite the turbulent past, our love endured, and we remained faithful to each other. After college, my closest friend, Jeanette, married her longtime partner, and I was honored to be her bridesmaid. Meanwhile, my lover and I decided to wait patiently to save enough money for our own wedding planned for the next year. About 6 months after Jeanette's wedding, my phone rang, and her name appeared on the caller ID. Anxiety gripped me as I answered. Something was wrong in Jeanette's voice. Trembling with sobs, she tried to formulate her thoughts through tears, revealing that something terrible had happened. Listening, I realized it had been 6 months since her wedding. Deep down, I instinctively felt that our conversation would bring sad news. While she struggled to control her emotions, she finally told me they had gone to the doctor and received devastating news. Jeanette was diagnosed with a condition that made her unable to conceive. Our past conversations about adoption came to mind, but now that option was closed to them too. The weight of this revelation hung heavily, and I could sense her despair. In that agonizing moment, I wanted to be her support. In her devastated state, she suggested we go to local bars and clubs to escape her emotional turmoil. The idea of dancing and laughing appealed to me, hoping it would offer her a fleeting respite. I assured her we would have an unforgettable evening, even if it meant temporarily forgetting her recent prognosis. Entering the club's vibrant energy, we dropped our inhibitions and embraced the night. Pulsating music and rhythmic lights synchronized with our bodies. The attention from other men distracted from the heavy burden Jeanette was carrying. It was a momentary release, a break from the devastation she faced. Weeks passed, and we were drawn to these nights of respite more frequently. The recognition from strangers began to fill us with newfound self-confidence, overshadowing the heavy revelation about my best friend's condition. Together, we enjoyed these evenings, laughing, dancing, and immersing ourselves in the moment, appreciating the temporary escape from our worries. One evening, amid the throbbing music and lively crowd, I confided in Jeanette, offering to become a surrogate mother for her if she ever considered it. I wanted to offer an alternative that could revive her hope. My words brought tears of gratitude to her eyes, igniting a brighter spark of joy in her heart. At that time, I was in a serious relationship with my current spouse. Understanding and sympathetic, he fully embraced the deep bond between me and my best friend. He supported me, knowing how important her happiness was in my life. But during this period of support, a secret truth was hidden from our partners. Unbeknownst to them, our nights out turned into reckless escapades with strangers, including passionate encounters. During this turbulent period, I found out I was pregnant. In a moment of vulnerability, I confided in Jeanette, expressing my uncertainty about the baby's paternity and considering termination. She fervently urged me to reconsider, valuing the privilege of motherhood. Succumbing to her persuasion, I decided to keep the baby, severing ties with those I met at the club and focusing on my relationship with my boyfriend. After deciding to carry the pregnancy to term, a deep transformation occurred within me. I began to reflect on my actions and felt increasingly repelled by them and my best friend's continued infidelity. Guilt overwhelmed me, especially for betraying the love of my life. I found the strength to speak openly with Jeanette, explaining I could no longer accompany her on these adventures if she continued to cheat. She understood and agreed to stop her behavior. Despite our moral disorder, we decided to hide our betrayal. Wanting to marry before showing, I convinced my boyfriend that it was the right time. He believed he was the father, as did I, despite uncertainties from past encounters. Shortly after, we married. During pregnancy, Jeanette provided constant support. A few months after my son's birth, Jeanette faced difficulties in her marriage, leading to a divorce. In her anguish, she sought solace in familiar coping mechanisms, to walk and have fun. But having learned from the experience of past years, I respectfully declined her invitation, mindful of the consequences that may arise as a result of such indulgence. Instead, we chose an alternative approach. We switched to fine salons, upscale restaurants, rejuvenating massages, invigorating yoga classes, and shopping. This alternative path turned out to be more pleasant than the desire for external confirmation from unfamiliar men and allowed us to preserve dignity and integrity. 6 years have passed, and I am happily married to my beloved spouse. We have 3 wonderful children, aged 6, 4, and 2 years old. Throughout all these changes, my friendship with my best friend remained unchanged. In the end, she found solace in other relationships that promised her new happiness and stability. Over the years, I've always hugged my best friend and her partner during our kids' birthday parties, Super Bowl get-togethers, and delightful family outings. It was clear that my dear friend and her partner radiate satisfaction and find solace in their harmonious relationship, which sincerely pleased me. But one day, an important conversation took place in which my friend touched on the topic of the birth of a child. She reminded me of my previous offer to become a surrogate mother, especially now that I have decided not to expand my family anymore. Despite the fact that I secretly hoped that she would never accept this offer, given the strong connection with my friend, I sincerely promised to support her. But I understood that it was necessary to discuss this important issue with my husband. As soon as he came home, I told him about her request, starting a frank conversation. To my surprise, my husband spoke out categorically against it, expressing reasonable concern about the potential risks associated with such an arrangement. He suggested considering the possibility of financially supporting another woman as a surrogate mother. In addition, he stressed that such a sacrifice would be a serious burden for our family, especially given his desire to have more children. It's no secret that my pregnancies have always been fraught with certain difficulties for our family, which further complicated the situation. Sympathizing with my husband's position, I tried to convey to him the hopes and aspirations of my girlfriend. But despite my sincere attempts to convince him, he remained steadfast in his decision. Unfortunately, I had no choice but to tell my friend the disappointing news that my husband does not support the idea of me becoming her surrogate mother. But we offered our help in finding a suitable surrogate mother and provided financial support. Unfortunately, she took this news very hard, feeling cheated because of an unfulfilled promise. Offended and upset, she walked away from the conversation, even calling me a fake friend. I tried to convey to her information about significant changes in my circumstances and responsibilities from the moment I made a promise. The result of our conversation left me with an absolutely terrible impression, and when I returned home, I shared my experiences with my husband. To my horror, he was also upset that I was counting on the role of a surrogate mother. He expressed confidence that over time I would be able to survive this disappointment. Unfortunately, I underestimated the depth of his feelings about the current situation. Unexpectedly for me, and for reasons unknown to me, he ran into my best friend's partner during their meeting. My best friend's boyfriend unexpectedly touched on this topic in a disrespectful way. This provoked a heated argument during which offensive words were uttered. In the midst of a tense argument, my best friend's partner went so far as to suggest that my husband conduct a DNA test of our eldest son, hinting that I might have had an intimacy not with him, but with someone else. When my husband told me about the quarrel with my best friend's boyfriend, I tried to downplay the significance of this situation, assuring him that he was just trying to cause emotional pain during their quarrel. In a state of despair, I did everything possible to distract my husband's attention from this issue. And yet, under the facade of calm, a deep sense of anxiety settled in me as the consequences of my past actions were coming in an ominous way. Finding a moment of privacy with my husband, I immediately turned to my best friend, demanding an explanation for the fact that she betrayed my trust and divulged such confidential information to her partner. She apologized, but I couldn't accept them because of my anger and resentment. Accusing her of manipulating me into leaving the baby, I expressed fears that she might have developed a plan to use this information against me, which could lead to the destruction of my life. She tried to explain that it was not her intention to use this information against me and claimed that she had never given him such instructions. Let me make it clear that I love my son very much, and if I had the opportunity to redo everything, I would prefer to keep him with me. But when I found out that my supposed girlfriend had disclosed this information to her boyfriend, I realized the need to reassess our relationship. Her actions could have jeopardized the sacred bonds of my marriage, which made me express my concern and ask to reconsider our friendly relations. After the end of the conversation with her friend, she persistently tried to contact us through calls and messages, but I deliberately decided not to answer. In the days that followed, I experienced overwhelming anxiety in the presence of my husband, walking cautiously on tiptoe, desperately hoping that he would change his mind about conducting a DNA test. 2 weeks passed, and I began to believe that normal life was gradually being restored, but my optimism turned out to be wrong. On one of the unremarkable evenings when the husband returned home, an unequivocal seriousness appeared on his face. Intuitively, I felt that an alarming aura enveloped him, signaling that something was wrong. I didn't expect how strong the blow would be from the revelation that my husband was going to make. With trepidation, we took our seats in the living room, his hands trembling as he plucked up the courage to speak. When he looked into my eyes, his voice trembled with a strong mixture of anger and suffering. "I did a DNA test on our son," he confessed, and his words hung in the air like a heavyweight. I was seized with horror. Beads of sweat stood out on my forehead. The secret truth that I've been hiding for 6 long years is about to be revealed. I didn't know that the consequences of his revelation would be so devastating. Summoning all my courage, I gathered strength and met his gaze. My voice barely breaking into a trembling whisper, with alarm and horror, I asked, "What did the test show?" In that agonizing moment, he paused, tears welling up in his eyes before he finally uttered the words that destroyed our world. "Our son is not biologically mine." A whirlwind of emotion swept through the room as the weight of his exposure fell on both of us. For many years, I carried a heavy burden of uncertainty, never fully knowing if he was really the father. The truth came crashing down on us, and the weight of unbearable pain was visible on his exhausted face. In the days that followed, he made the heartbreaking decision to move out of our once harmonious family hearth, leaving me alone to deal with the wreckage of our ruined marriage. Overwhelmed with guilt and shame, I tried to cope with deep betrayal towards the person I deeply loved, as well as the child we lovingly raised as a family. In addition, I could not get rid of the accumulated resentment against my close friend and her partner who, without knowing it, were drawn into the web I had woven. The feeling of betrayal that gripped me gave rise to hatred for my once closest friend. The scale of her betrayal intensified the already insurmountable pain inside, stretching our friendship to the limit. I could not get rid of the burden of guilt that I placed on her for the devastating events that occurred in our lives. Despite the realization that it was my actions that led to this tragedy, remembering those hard days, I feel an uncontrollable surge of remorse and sadness that do not leave my heart. The consequences of my choice have caused irreparable damage to the lives of the people most dear to me. After his revelations, we found ourselves facing the fragments of a previously happy family destroyed by deception and betrayal. The following days passed in an atmosphere of tension, boiling anger, and heartache. He could no longer meet my gaze without a sense of betrayal gnawing at his soul. The inevitability of divorce was in the air. Our once loving home, which was a sanctuary of joy and affection, has turned into an emotional battleground. After several weeks of painful discussions and conflicts, the decisive evening came when he decisively announced his intentions. Finally, the words I had been so afraid of, full of suffering and determination, burst from his lips. "I can't live like this anymore. I want a divorce." Each syllable weighed heavily on the heart, increasing the pain inside. Despite the fact that the inevitability of this moment hung over us, its utterance made it painfully real. I understood the depth of his anger and frustration because I had broken his trust in the cruelest way imaginable. But the hardest moment for his heart in his decision was the desire to distance himself from our beloved son, the child whom for many years he sincerely considered his own. Now, the child found himself facing a deep abyss, which I insanely did. The once unbreakable bond between father and son was tragically severed and will never be restored. It was painful to watch him turn away from a child who knew nothing but his love and admiration. Matthew, too young to understand all the subtleties of the situation, intuitively sensed a change in his father's behavior. The confusion and resentment that flashed in his innocent eyes were a constant source of heartache for me. After moving into a separate apartment, my husband forcibly severed all ties with the life that we had carefully built together. His determination to move on without me remained unchanged, leaving no room for negotiations and reconciliation. The burden of my misdeeds, the grievous loss of my husband, and the huge misfortune that the man Matthew adored endured weighed heavily on my conscience. The beginning of the divorce process revealed the harsh reality of our fragmented family, which became indisputable evidence of the destructiveness of my actions. I could not get rid of the all-encompassing burden of responsibility for the pain and shock that I caused to the people most dear to me. Unfortunately, the consequences of my actions turned out to be the catalyst that irreparably destroyed our previously strong family, leaving wounds that may never heal. Over time, I chose to distance myself from my former best friend, harboring a deep resentment against her and her partner for their involuntary participation in the disaster that occurred. To this day, our paths remain undiscovered, and I have a hard time getting rid of feelings of anger and dislike. I'm very angry with her and consider her a disgusting person who does not deserve to be a mother. I hope for this pain to come back to her like a boomerang.